The gun was already pressed against her temple before most people in the restaurant even understood what was happening. Elena Park didn't blink. She looked at the masked man holding the weapon like he'd asked her a wildly inconvenient question about the dessert menu. Her hands stayed steady at her sides. Her breathing didn't change. And in the corner booth near the kitchen, Victor DeLuca noticed everything. He always did. That's how you survived 30 years in organized crime. You watched. You learned. You remembered who flinched and who didn't. And right now, watching this young waitress stare down an armed robber with the kind of calm that didn't belong on someone her age, Victor knew something was very wrong. Or very right. He hadn't decided which yet. The evening had started like any other Friday at Ravello, Manhattan's most exclusive Italian restaurant where reservations required either serious money or serious connections. Victor had both. He sat in his usual corner table, the one with clear sight lines to every entrance and exit, picking at veal piccata he barely tasted. Business dinners were theater. The food was just a prop. But tonight he'd come alone, which meant tonight he was actually thinking. Dangerous habit for a man in his position. That's when he'd first noticed her. Elena moved through the chaos of dinner rush like water flowing around stones. Effortless. Efficient. But it wasn't her grace that caught his attention. Plenty of waitresses were graceful. It was her eyes. They never stopped moving. Scanning faces. Tracking positions. Noting exits. She carried herself like someone who'd memorized every escape route in the building before her first shift started. Victor recognized the behavior because he did the same thing. When she'd brought his drink earlier, she'd approached from his left side, staying out of his blind spot, giving him space to react if he needed to. Most people didn't think about things like that. Soldiers did. Operatives did. People who'd been hunted did. Victor had been coming to Ravello for 5 years. He knew every server, every busboy, every face in the kitchen. Elena was new. 3 weeks, maybe a month. He'd asked the manager about her casually, the way you ask about anything that catches your interest. The manager had shrugged. Said she was a good worker. Quiet. Professional. Showed up on time. Nothing remarkable. But Victor built an empire on noticing what other people missed. And Elena Park was remarkable in ways the manager couldn't see. The way she positioned herself when taking orders, always keeping the table between herself and the customer. The way she never turned her back to the door. The way her smile was perfect and empty at the same time, like a mask she'd practiced in a mirror until it became automatic. The front doors exploded inward at exactly 8:47. 3 men in ski masks burst through with pistols raised, screaming orders that barely registered as words. Customers hit the floor. A woman screamed. Someone's wine glass shattered against marble tile. The restaurant transformed from elegant dining into a hostage situation in under 5 seconds. Victor stayed seated, his hand drifting casually toward the weapon holstered at his spine, hidden under his tailored jacket. He'd been through robberies before. Sometimes you let them play out. Sometimes you end them. The trick was knowing which situation you were in. While everyone else dropped or scrambled in terror, Elena simply set down the tray she'd been carrying. Slow. Controlled. Like she was finishing a task before moving to the next one. Her weight shifted slightly onto the balls of her feet. Her shoulders squared. Her gaze locked onto the nearest gunman with an assessment that made Victor's instincts scream. That wasn't fear. That was calculation. She was measuring distance, threat level, timing. The same way he would. The same way a professional would. And suddenly Victor wasn't thinking about whether to intervene. He was thinking about who the hell this woman really was. The lead gunman, tall and twitchy with a voice that cracked when he shouted, swept his weapon across the room. Nobody moves. Nobody calls. You do what we say, you go home. His partners flanked him, covering different sections. Standard formation. They'd done this before. Not experts but not amateurs either. Dangerous middle ground. The tall one's eyes landed on Elena, who stood perfectly still. He moved toward her, gun extended. Where's the safe? In the office, Elena said. Her voice was steady. Polite. The tone you'd use to give directions to a tourist. Not the tone you used when someone pointed a loaded weapon at your face. Victor's eyes narrowed. The gunman grabbed Elena's arm and yanked her forward. She moved with him, not resisting, but Victor saw it. The micro-adjustment in her stance. The way her free hand hung loose but ready. She was compliant the way a coiled spring was still. The gunman didn't notice. He was already shouting at the manager, demanding keys, making threats. Elena just nodded and started walking toward the back hallway, leading them toward the office. The other two gunmen kept their weapons trained on the customers. Standard setup. Use a hostage to access the money, keep the crowd controlled. They probably expected to be in and out in 3 minutes. They didn't make it to 2. Elena walked 5 steps down the hallway, the tall gunman right behind her, his attention split between her and shouting orders at his partners. That's when she moved. Her arms snapped up, catching the serving tray she'd somehow grabbed off a nearby station, and she swung it like a shield, slamming the edge into the gunman's wrist with surgical precision. The gun clattered to the floor. Before he could process what happened, she pivoted, drove her elbow into his solar plexus, and followed through with a sweep that took his legs out completely. He went down hard. The whole sequence took maybe 3 seconds. The second gunman spun toward the hallway, weapon rising, but Elena was already moving. She grabbed the fallen gun, ejected the magazine in one smooth motion, and threw both pieces in opposite directions. Not to use them. To eliminate them. Then she was on him, using his own momentum against him, redirecting his aim toward the ceiling as she delivered a palm strike to his jaw that Victor heard from across the room. The man's eyes rolled back. He dropped like someone had cut his strings. The third gunman was screaming now, swinging his weapon wildly, trying to track Elena's movement, but she'd already closed the distance with a fire extinguisher from the wall mount. One swing. Cling. Efficient. He collapsed. 30 seconds. 3 armed men. 0 hesitation. The restaurant stayed frozen in shocked silence. Elena set down the fire extinguisher, adjusted her black apron and walked back into the dining room. Her expression hadn't changed. She looked at the scattered customers still pressed against the floor and offered a small, apologetic smile. "I'm very sorry for the disruption," she said. "Your meals are complimentary this evening. Can I get anyone water?" Nobody answered. Victor DeLuca stared at her across the room, and for the first time in 15 years he felt genuinely surprised. He'd seen soldiers, enforcers, trained killers work. Elena moved like all 3 and none of them. Her technique was too precise to be self-taught, too fluid to be military, too controlled to be street fighting. Someone had trained her extensively. Someone very good. And now she was working as a waitress in Manhattan, pretending to be normal, hoping nobody noticed. But Victor noticed everything. The police arrived 12 minutes later. They took statements, collected evidence, arrested the 3 unconscious men. The detective in charge, a tired-looking woman named Morrison, spent 20 minutes interviewing Elena. Victor watched from his table as Elena answered questions with the same calm politeness she used with customers. Victor returned to Ravello the next night. Elena was working the same section, moving through her routine with the same careful efficiency. Victor watched her deflect personal questions from customers, watched her position herself near exits, watched her scan faces like she was memorizing everyone in the room. When she brought his appetizer, he spoke quietly. "That was impressive yesterday." "I got lucky," Elena said. "Nobody gets that lucky." She met his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Long enough to acknowledge the comment. "Can I get you anything else?" Victor ordered wine he didn't want and watched her walk away. She knew he was watching. And she knew he knew. This was going to be interesting. He'd built his organization on reading people. Understanding their motivations. Finding their pressure points. Elena was a puzzle wrapped in politeness, and Victor had always liked puzzles. Especially the dangerous ones. He came back every night for a week. By the 3rd night he'd confirmed she spoke at least 4 languages. He'd heard her switch effortlessly from English to Italian to Korean to Spanish, adjusting not just words but accent and body language for each customer. Native fluency in all of them. That took years of immersion. By the 5th night he'd noticed she never wrote down orders. Perfect memory. She could take orders for a table of 8, remember every modification, every dietary restriction, every timing request, and deliver everything perfectly without consulting notes. Victor started asking around. Carefully. He had contacts everywhere. People who owed him favors. People who knew how to find information without leaving traces. He learned Elena Park had appeared in New York 4 years ago with documentation that was technically legitimate but felt manufactured. Social Security number that traced back to a birth certificate in California, But no school records, no medical history, no digital footprint before her arrival. She'd worked 6 different service jobs in that time, never staying anywhere longer than 8 months. Always moving. Always careful. Always alone. One night when Elena brought his check, he spoke without looking up. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" She hesitated. First real crack in her composure. "Self-defense classes." "Try again." "I don't know what you mean." Victor finally looked at her directly. His voice dropped to a tone that made career criminals nervous. "I've seen Navy SEALs work. I've seen Spetsnaz operators work. I've seen killers with 20 years of experience work. You moved like all of them. So I'll ask once more. Where did you learn?" Elena's jaw tightened. For a moment he thought she might walk away. Instead she pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. Bold move. Stupid or confident, he couldn't tell yet. "I was raised to survive," she said simply. "That's all you need to know." Victor smiled. He liked that. No games. No fake politeness. Just boundaries clearly drawn. "You're hiding," he said. It wasn't a question. "Everyone's hiding something." "Not like you." Elena stood up, smoothing her apron. "Enjoy your evening, Mr. DeLuca." She walked away before he could respond. Victor sat back in his chair, genuinely impressed. She knew his name. Knew who he was. Probably knew exactly what he did for a living. And still sat down at his table without flinching. Either she was fearless or she'd dealt with worse than Mafia bosses. Both options made him more curious. Victor left a tip that was twice the bill and made a decision. He was going to find out everything about Elena Park. Not because he needed to. Because he wanted to. 2 days later his people found something. A contact in immigration flagged an unusual search pattern. Someone had been running inquiries on Korean women in their 20s who'd entered the United States in the last 5 years. Dozens of searches. Systematic. Professional. The searches were masked behind corporate security services. But Victor's contact had traced them back to a private investigation firm based in Seoul. Someone was looking for someone. And given Elena's reaction to his questions, Victor had a strong suspicion who that someone was. He made a note to dig deeper but decided not to push Elena yet. If she was running from something serious, confronting her too directly might make her disappear. And he wasn't ready for that. He found her 2 nights later at a closed gym in Brooklyn at 1 in the morning. Victor had people who specialized in finding people who didn't want to be found. It took them 48 hours to track her post-work routine, which was 47 hours longer than usual. Elena was good at disappearing. He watched through the window as she moved through forms that looked like taekwondo mixed with something older, more brutal. Her strikes were sharp. Her transitions were seamless. She wasn't practicing. She was maintaining. Keeping skills fresh. Skills that took years to develop. Skills that required dedication most people couldn't comprehend. Victor opened the gym door. Elena spun, dropping into a defensive stance before recognizing him. She straightened slowly, breathing controlled despite the obvious workout. "You're following me now?" "I'm curious." "Find a different hobby. Tell me the truth and I'll consider it." Elena grabbed a towel, wiping sweat from her face. She was silent for so long Victor thought she might actually walk out. Then she spoke and her voice carried weight that hadn't been there before. "My real name is Min Seo-yeon. My grandfather raised me in Seoul. He was a martial artist. One of the best in Korea. Trained me from the time I could walk. Not for sport. For survival. He'd seen things. Done things. He wanted me prepared for a world that doesn't forgive weakness." Victor listened without interrupting. This was the kind of story you didn't rush. "When I was 17, my family arranged my marriage to a businessman named Han Kwon. Powerful man. Connected. The kind of person you don't say no to. Except I did. I told them I wouldn't marry someone I'd never met. Someone who saw me as property. They didn't care. My parents had debts. Han had money. I was the payment." Elena's voice stayed flat, factual, but Victor heard the anger underneath. "They held an engagement ceremony without my consent. Announced it publicly. Then Han's people came for me. Took me from my grandfather's house. Held me in a compound outside Seoul for 3 weeks. Told me I'd learn to be obedient." "What happened?" Victor asked quietly. "I broke a guard's arm. Took his keys. Fought my way through 2 more security personnel. Left the compound on fire behind me. She looked at Victor directly. I was raised to survive. So I did. My grandfather helped me disappear. New identity. New country. New life. But Han Quan doesn't forgive. Doesn't forget. He's been looking ever since. Victor processed that. Forced marriage. Kidnapping. Violent escape. No wonder she moved like someone who'd been hunted. How long ago? For years. He's still looking? Men like him don't stop looking. I'm not just someone who got away. I'm proof he can be defied. That's worse than anything I could have done to him physically. Victor understood men like that. Powerful. Proud. Obsessed with control and possession. He dealt with them before. Sometimes as allies. Sometimes as enemies. Always carefully. Why New York? Because it's big enough to disappear and connected enough to have leverage if I need it. Because people don't ask too many questions if you work hard and keep your head down. Because I hoped distance would make me not worth the effort. She paused. I was wrong. The robbery, Victor said. That wasn't random. Elena's expression shifted. Surprise maybe. Or concern. What do you mean? 3 men with guns storm a restaurant during peak hours. They don't rob customers. They head straight for you. Make you lead them to the back. That's not a robbery. That's an extraction attempt disguised as a robbery. Elena sat down heavily on a nearby bench. You're sure? I've seen it before. Different contexts. Same pattern. Victor moved closer. Someone knew you were there. Someone gave them your location. Who? I don't know yet. But I'm going to find out. Elena looked up at him, and for the first time since they'd met, Victor saw fear in her eyes. Not for herself. For what was coming. You should stay away from this, she said. Han Quan has resources you can't imagine. Government connections. International reach. If he thinks you're protecting me, he'll come after you too. Let him. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. Victor's voice was cold now. Someone used my territory to hunt someone under my protection. That's a violation. I don't forgive violations. I'm not under your protection. You are now. Elena stared at him for a long moment. Then she laughed, but there was no humor in it. Why, you barely know me. I'm nobody. Just a waitress with problems you don't need. Good question. Victor had asked himself the same question 50 times over the last week. Every logical answer told him to walk away. Elena was a liability. Her problems weren't his problems. Getting involved with Han Quan risked international complications Victor didn't need. But when he thought about her sitting across from him in that restaurant, drawing boundaries without fear, or watching her take down 3 armed men to protect strangers, or seeing her now, ready to shoulder her burden alone rather than let it touch anyone else, something in his chest tightened in a way he didn't entirely understand. Because I've spent 30 years in this business, he said quietly. And I've never met anyone who stayed calm the way you do. That kind of strength is rare. Worth protecting. Elena's eyes searched his face like she was looking for the lie. She wouldn't find one. Finally she nodded. Thank you. But if this gets too dangerous, if Han becomes a real problem, you walk away. I won't let you get hurt because of me. That's not your decision to make. Then we're going to have problems. Victor smiled despite himself. I'm counting on it. Everything changed 3 days later when Leon Graves walked into Victor's office looking nervous. Leon was Victor's logistics coordinator. Handled shipments, routes, payments. Competent. Loyal. Or so Victor had thought. Leon stood in front of the desk, sweating despite the air conditioning, and Victor knew before the man spoke that something had gone very wrong. We need to talk, Leon said. Then talk. The robbery at Ravello. It wasn't random. Victor's expression didn't change, but every muscle in his body tensed. Explain. Leon swallowed hard. I got contacted 2 months ago. Man offered serious money for information on anyone new working locations you frequent. Said he was looking for someone. Asian woman, mid-20s, trained fighter. I didn't think anything of it until I saw her at the restaurant. Saw what she did. I made a call. Confirmed her location. The robbery was supposed to grab her in the confusion. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Victor stood slowly. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. The dangerous kind of quiet that preceded violence. The money was too good to pass up. 50,000 just for confirmation she was there. Another 100 if the extraction worked. Leon backed toward the door, hands raised. Look, I can fix this. I can call it off. Tell them it was a mistake. Who's looking for her? Korean businessman. Han Kwon. Big money. International connections. Real serious type. Has people everywhere. Victor's mind raced through implications. Han Kwon. The man Elena ran from. The man who'd held her captive. Who'd tried to force her into marriage. And Leon had sold her location for profit. For money. Betrayal for money Victor could almost respect. Betrayal for greed was just disappointing. Get out, Victor said quietly. Boss, I can. Get out before I change my mind about how this ends. Leon fled. Victor sat back down, fingers steepled, thinking. This was worse than he'd anticipated. Han Kwon was escalating. The failed robbery meant he knew Elena was in New York. Knew she was connected to Victor's territory. Which meant Han would either back off out of respect for boundaries, or push harder to prove he couldn't be intimidated. Men like Han usually chose the second option. Victor pulled out his phone and made a call. Find everything on Han Kwon. Business records, properties, connections, legal issues. I want pressure points. And find Elena. Keep her safe. Don't let her out of your sight. Should we expect trouble? His security chief asked. Assume it's already here. Victor spent the next day building a profile on Han Kwon. What he found wasn't encouraging. Han ran a legitimate business empire spanning electronics manufacturing, real estate development and import-export operations. Net worth in the billions. Political connections that reached into the Korean government at high levels. Charitable donations that bought goodwill and protection. On paper he was untouchable. A respected businessman. A pillar of the community. But Victor had learned long ago that respectability was just expensive camouflage. Everyone had secrets. Everyone had weaknesses. He just had to know where to look. His people dug deeper. Found shell companies. Offshore accounts. Business deals that violated international trade agreements. Bribery payments disguised as consulting fees. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would survive in court without extensive investigation. But enough to cause problems if the right people started asking the right questions. Victor compiled everything into a file and started making calls. He reached out to contacts in Seoul. People who understood how business really worked. People who owed him favors. He asked questions. Gathered intelligence. Built a map of Han Kwon's empire, looking for the places where pressure could be applied. Han Kwon sent his message 2 days later. A courier delivered a tablet to Victor's office. No return address. No explanation. Just a device that powered on automatically when Victor touched it. The video showed Elena's grandfather, Min Jae-ho, sitting in what looked like an immigration detention facility. The old man looked thin. Tired. But his eyes burned with the same intensity Victor had seen in Elena's. Han's voice played over the footage, smooth and cultured, speaking English with barely an accent. Mr. DeLuca. I understand you've taken interest in something that belongs to me. I'm a reasonable man. I believe in negotiation. So here's my offer. Return Min Seo-yeon within 72 hours and her grandfather goes free. Refuse and he disappears into a system that will never release him. Immigration violations. Falsified documents. Suspicious financial activity. I have the resources to make his situation very complicated. Very permanent. Your choice. The video ended. Victor watched it 3 times, memorizing details. The facility looked legitimate. Government-run. Which meant Han had pull with Korean immigration authorities. Or enough money to fake it convincingly. Either way, the threat was real. Elena's grandfather was leverage. The only leverage that mattered. Victor had dealt with hostage situations before. Usually they ended with violence. Sometimes they ended with negotiation. Rarely they ended well for everyone involved. He needed to find the rare option. He went to find Elena. She was in her apartment, a tiny studio in Queens that looked like a temporary shelter. Minimal furniture. No personal items. A single suitcase visible in the closet. Ready to run at any moment. The locks on the door were commercial grade. The windows had security film. She turned a basic rental into a bunker. Victor knocked. Elena opened the door with a knife in her hand, saw who it was and lowered it slowly. How did you find me? Same way Han did. Can I come in? She stepped aside. The apartment was exactly what Victor expected. Clean. Functional. Impersonal. A place to sleep, not a place to live. Elena had been running so long she'd forgotten how to stop. Victor showed her the video. Watched her face drain of color. Watched her hands start shaking for the first time since he'd met her. When the video ended, she played it again. Then a third time. Like she was trying to memorize her grandfather's face. When? She asked. Yesterday. What does he want? In exchange for your grandfather's freedom. Elena closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were wet, but her voice was steady. Then that's what he gets. No. You don't understand. That's my grandfather. The only family I have. The man who raised me. Who taught me everything. Who helped me escape when everyone else wanted me to be obedient. I can't let him suffer because of me. Victor moved closer. You go back, you don't come back. Han won't let you leave again. You know that. I know. So we find another way. There is no other way. Elena's voice cracked. You don't know Han Quan. He has government connections. Business ties across 3 continents. Money. Power. Lawyers. Politicians. He doesn't lose. Ever. If I don't surrender, my grandfather dies. If I do surrender, at least he lives. That's the only math that matters. What about your life? What about it? I've been running for 4 years. Hiding. Pretending to be someone I'm not. Always looking over my shoulder. Always waiting for the next attempt. Maybe this is better. Maybe I just face it. Get it over with. Victor grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. Listen to me. You survived kidnapping. Fought your way out. Built a new life from nothing. Stayed calm when men with guns tried to take you. You think after all that I'm going to let you walk into a cage because some businessman with delusions of ownership made a threat? Not happening. Then what do we do? The desperation in Elena's voice was raw. This was the first time Victor had seen her mask slip completely. He has my grandfather. He has all the leverage. What can we possibly do? Victor was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that surprised them both. We take away his leverage. All of it. Elena stared at him. How? By making it cost more to keep fighting than to walk away. Han thinks he has power. But power is just resources plus reputation. We destroy his reputation. Threaten his resources. Force him to choose between keeping you and keeping everything else he's built. That's not a plan. That's a concept. Give me 48 hours. If I can't deliver, you make your choice then. Elena searched his face. Looking for certainty. Looking for hope. Finding something in between. Finally, she nodded once. 48 hours. Then I'm done hiding. Victor spent the next 2 days building a case that would destroy Han Quan. His people worked through business records, contracts, shell companies. Han was smart. But nobody operated at his level without leaving traces. Victor found them. Import violations that broke international trade law. Electronics shipments that didn't match customs declarations. Bribery payments to government officials disguised as consulting fees. Real estate deals structured to avoid taxes in 3 countries. Business partnerships with companies on international watch lists. Any one of them alone was manageable with enough lawyers and enough money. All of them together, released to the right authorities at the right time, would trigger investigations across multiple jurisdictions that would freeze Han's assets, destroy his political relationships, and turn him from respected businessman to international scandal. Victor compiled everything into a comprehensive file. Documents, transaction records, communication logs, witness statements from people Han had crossed. He organized it professionally, made it easy to follow, made it devastating. Then he reached out to contacts in Seoul, New York, London. Journalists who specialized in corporate corruption. Government investigators looking for high-profile cases. Competitors who'd love to see Han fall. He didn't send the file. Not yet. But he made sure everyone knew it existed. Made sure word would reach Han that his empire was one phone call away from complete exposure. Then Victor made his move. Han Quan answered on the second ring. His voice was pleasant. Confident. Mr. DeLuca. I trust you're calling with good news. I'm calling with an offer, Victor said. His voice was cold. Professional. The tone he used when violence was on the table but civility was still possible. You have 72 hours to release Min Jae-ho and withdraw all claims on his granddaughter. You do that, this conversation stays between us. You refuse, and every document I'm looking at right now gets sent to authorities in Seoul, New York, and London simultaneously, along with copies to major news outlets, business partners, political allies, everyone. Silence on the other end. Victor let it stretch. Let Han process, calculate, understand exactly how much he stood to lose. You're bluffing, Han said finally. I don't bluff. Check your email. Victor heard typing. Then silence. Then Han's voice, colder now. All pretense of pleasantness gone. This is coercion. This is business. You tried to take something from my territory. I'm responding. You can accept my terms and walk away clean, or you can fight and lose everything you've spent 30 years building. Your choice. But understand something. I don't care about money. I don't care about reputation. I care about keeping my word. And I gave my word to protect Elena. So you can have your pride or you can have your empire. You can't have both. Victor could practically hear the calculations happening. Han was smart, ruthless, but ultimately pragmatic. Men like him didn't build empires by making emotional decisions. They built them by knowing when to fight and when to fold. She's worth this much to you? Han asked. She's worth more. Victor heard something in Han's breathing. Recalculation. Cost-benefit analysis happening in real time. Finally Han spoke. The engagement is dissolved. The marriage contract is void. The old man will be released within 24 hours. But if she ever returns to Korea, if she ever uses her real name again, if she ever interferes with my business, the deal is void. Are we clear? Crystal. Then we're done. The line went dead. Victor sat back in his chair and allowed himself a small smile. Sometimes violence was the answer. Sometimes leverage was better. He called Elena. It's over. Your grandfather will be released tomorrow. Han's backing off. What did you do? Made it expensive to keep fighting. Victor. Get some sleep, Elena. You're safe now. He hung up before she could argue. Before she could ask questions he wasn't ready to answer. Because the truth was, Victor wasn't entirely sure why he'd risked so much for someone he barely knew. Professional interest didn't explain it. Curiosity didn't explain it. Something else had driven his decision. Something uncomfortable and unfamiliar that felt suspiciously like caring about another person's well-being more than his own interests. Dangerous territory for a man in his position. But Victor had spent 30 years being careful. Maybe it was time to be reckless. 3 months later, Elena left Ravello for good. She didn't need to hide anymore. Didn't need to pretend to be someone small and forgettable. Victor offered her a position in his organization handling security intelligence and strategic planning. She accepted. Not because she needed the job or the money, but because she wanted to. Because working with Victor felt like using skills she'd suppressed for years. Skills her grandfather had trained into her. Skills that made her feel like herself again. Her grandfather was safe in Seoul, video calling her twice a week, telling stories about his students and asking when she'd visit. Han Kwan never contacted her again. His business empire continued operating, diminished but intact. And Elena moved through Victor's world with the same calm precision she'd shown that night in the restaurant, except now everyone knew what it meant. He was good at the work. Better than good. She understood security from both sides. Knew how attackers thought because she'd been one. Knew how targets acted because she'd been one of those too. She identified vulnerabilities Victor's people missed. Suggested improvements that seemed obvious once she explained them but that nobody else had considered. Within 2 months she was leading the security division. Within 3 she was sitting in on strategy meetings that shaped how Victor's entire organization operated. On a quiet evening in Victor's office, Elena reviewed security protocols while Victor handled paperwork. The kind of domestic routine that felt strange and comfortable at the same time. She looked up. I never thanked you. You don't need to. You risked a lot. For someone you barely knew. Why? Victor set down his pen and met her eyes. He'd been asking himself the same question for months. Had tried to find a logical answer that made sense. Protection of territory. Strategic alliance. Professional interest. But none of those were true. Not really. I've ruled through fear my whole life, he said quietly. Control. Power. Force. Making people understand that crossing me had consequences they couldn't afford. That's how you survive in this world. That's how you build something that lasts. But watching you stay calm when everyone else panicked, watching you handle violence without becoming violent, watching you choose to protect strangers who'd never know your real name or what you'd sacrificed. That's different. That's strength I've been trying to fake for 30 years. You're not as scary as you think you are, Elena said with a slight smile. Don't spread that around. Bad for business. She laughed, and Victor realized he'd been hearing that sound more often lately. Small moments of genuine happiness breaking through years of careful control. Elena went back to her work, and Victor watched her for a moment before returning to his own papers. The story had spread through certain circles. A waitress who didn't flinch during a robbery. A mafia boss who noticed. A criminal empire that collapsed because someone chose principle over profit. People told different versions. Some said it was about love. Others said it was about respect. Some said it was about power recognizing power. Victor didn't bother correcting them. Let them wonder. Let them tell whatever version made sense to them. He knew the truth. Elena didn't need saving. He never had. She'd survived everything life threw at her through strength and skill and stubborn refusal to break. She just needed someone to see her clearly and choose to stand beside her instead of in her way. And Victor, for the first time in his long, violent career, had chosen correctly. The world noticed. Articles were written. Questions were asked. Theories were developed. But Victor only cared that Elena stayed calm. Because in his world of constant chaos and manufactured fear and carefully controlled violence, that was the rarest thing of all. And he'd be damned if he let anyone take it from her again. They worked late most nights. Building something neither of them fully understood yet. Not quite partnership. Not quite friendship. Something more complicated and more honest that will last forever. Thank you for watching this story. Please subscribe and tell me where you are watching from in the comments.